inviting me along today. I'm William Barraclough, Director of Product at 888 Holdings, which is the brand that owns William Hill, 888, and Mr. Green. We're a sort of multi-jurisdiction, globally located sports and gambling firm. So I'm a designer by trade for 15 years as a practitioner, and then for the last 10 years I've been fortunate to basically manage and lead design teams at the likes of Zoopla, Uswitch, Tide, a US business called Red Ventures, and then more recently at 888 Holdings, which I joined just under 2 years ago.
Amazing. Thanks, Will. Well, really good to have you here. So we're going to run through, I've got a bunch of questions to talk to Will about. If any of you have questions and want to pose them, then do put them in the chat, or feel free to put your hand up. I'm happy for you to ask questions directly if that's what you prefer. But yeah, let's jump in. So Will, talk us through a bit about just your background, as you said, as you started, and kind of some of the teams that you've gone on to lead. And I think when we last spoke, you talked about working with some agencies along that journey. So kind of what talk us through that experience and what that's looked like.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that journey into sort of manager leadership really started one of our viewers, Julie Kennedy, who was my manager when I was at Betfair, and I was in her team as part of UX product design a decade ago, and there was a notable need to join the different facets of the business. It was weird for something that's always customer facing, that marketing, brand, product didn't really have any relationship, and there were these disparate layers. And I think what Julie's strength was to bring that together. And then I was fortunate to become a part of that team, and with my background in creative, was to actually help shape our brand, but through the layer of product. We didn't have any physical spaces like the brands I work in today. So very much the product was the brand, the interaction was the experience of brand coming together. So a decision was made, and we partnered with a brand agency called Dixon Baxi, still around today, marvelous agency, Paula and Simon, and reinvigorated that brand, but very much a digital first layer, and thinking about, well, how did the brand values come to life through a digital layer, accessibility from a color and type point of view, and then what are the needs of the customer ultimately, and how did that transition through to the marketing, the types of communications we put out. And that was really sort of my first foray into design systems, which I could nerd and talk about for hours and hours, but I do think they're a sort of foundational pillar of creating a modern organization that aligns across all of the different customer facing and internal touch points.
Yeah, and I think for me, that's when digital products and brands started to diverge a little bit and become one of the same things. Because until that, you'd have the sort of physical world, which was like, and sometimes your brand was seen as something that might be on a TV ad, but it might be experienced in a shop or in a physical environment. The digital sort of user experience of an app or a web app or online experience, it was just about how the product became the brand and the brand was the product. Mm-hmm. And I know Dixon Baxi, so I think that's something they always really understood and got really well. And actually that interaction was also part of the brand and how you made people feel, and something like Amazon capitalized on ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can look at the body of work they did for Hulu. Really great example of where that then transitions into the product experience, and those little micro interactions or the audio brand elements come to life. It's like PayPal when you get paid, and the little tone of cash when you get your money from eBay or something. All of those little lovely interactions, the more we see that, the better you exist into that brand layer.
Yeah. So talk to me about some of the teams that you've led. So I guess it's been brand, product, and marketing. So I presume you've had to kind of get marketing and engineering and different sort of teams working together. Might have been, back at Tide. What was your sort of approach to building collaboration between those teams when you first came in?
Yeah, good question. So I was brought into Tide, joined January 20, so a few months before the pandemic. I think it was a team of 3 people in product design, mostly sort of junior to mid layer and a UX writer. There hadn't really been heavy investment within design as a whole. And I think the space that they were occupying was very much startup mode, so bare bones, minimum viable product approach to what they did. And that very much translated across all of their surfaces. As I said, I think I've been trying since my days at Betfair to find an organization where there was a role I could occupy that space between sort of brand, the marketing design, to product design, to create this cohesive layer. So the opportunity there was, after obviously pandemic hit within 3 months, but after the first sort of 9 months, was realizing that there was quite big ambitions for that brand, and those ambitions are realized today with their launch into India and other geographies around Europe. But the different surfaces they occupied, especially brand, marketing, and the product, they just didn't coexist. Apart from a touch of blue, but that doesn't mean that's a brand. But the tone of voice was completely different depending on where you were. They talked it very much a sort of matter of fact scientific approach to banking, and frankly, my view of business banking is it's a bit dull. But launching businesses, now that's exciting. And all of the things that we wanted to be as an organization was to be the financial enabler and layer. So we weren't interested in the banking, it was to be the admin platform so that we could get business owners back to doing what they love. So if you're a, I don't know, pizza truck owner and you want to do that, pretty sure you didn't sign up to do receipts and admin and tax. It was about doing your business. So how can you create an experience that services all of that, but gets customers, our customers, back to doing what they want? So we looked at about 9 or 10 months in, I could realize that the ambition to launch globally, where we were positioned and how we presented ourselves, just wasn't sufficient for a global brand. When you're going up against the likes of Revolut and Monzo or Visa, we were very colloquial and local. And what we need to be was a sort of more term I heard yesterday, global and local. So we started a piece of work that I commissioned was to look at, well, how could our brand evolve? What does that look like? We did that all in-house with a really skeleton crew, about 3 of us. So a great designer called Oscar that sort of led the visual entity, and then a UX writer and a couple of other designers who are interested in that space, but very much looking at it from all of the surfaces. And we had a boutique agency called Sidekick that helped us on the photography and enabling those layers. And over time, we sort of built it up, but it was very much a thing we did internally. And I will say, if I think there was a lack of appetite and understanding from the wider organization to why they needed this, because they were very much in that sort of startup MVP culture, and things were done at a sort of very last minute pace. But I think having seen the benefits of what we created and the numbers and the scale over a 2-year period, that is how we then worked to bring engineering. So we looked at our desktop experience. The engineering team were working on something already. So it was like, well, here's a great example to start bringing in some of the layers of the design system, but then marry up to the other areas. And James, one of the product designers, James Samuel Camps, led that body of work. And I think that's half of my sort of leadership style, is to find the really good people, boldly get mostly out of their way, create the environment where they can thrive. And they were spotting the opportunities to what was the right time and place that we could link that body of work together. And then over the next year, we worked continually to sort of evolve the design system, which we call Portal, layer out the brands, and we did 2 very successful TV campaigns. And I think that really changed the direction and the sort of, not the ambition of the company, that was large, but the ambition of how we presented ourselves, and the standard of what we did went up across the board. So for internal presentations, which were really hacky when I first joined. I mean, literally there was no care or love given into it, even from the way that it was broadcast. You know, it wasn't even as smooth as Zoom call like this. It's just all of that presentation there. So I think for my time in corporate communications, learning about the brand externally is equally important as the brand internally, and how you feel as an employee and how that's presented, and then that symbiosis between the front facing and the internal facing layers. But engineering is critical to us getting in early day, getting buy-in, starting with the desktop experience, and then even now I can see that they're evolving that through, but it's still very true to the work that we did. And I think that's the power of someone, ugly to be short and blunt, giving a shit, just taking it. Nobody gave me the permission to do it, just went out and did it, drove it like I stole it, and just made it happen. And then suddenly you're like, well, here's the work. And then, thank you very much, that's great, wonderful. And they continue to do it. And it's nice to see that in the real world. Sometimes I see some of their ads on the underground, and it's just I shake it how bad some of the type is. But when I see some of the TV ads, or I see the website progressing, and certainly the app experience today is leaps and bounds ahead from where it was. And I think that's from the foundation of setting the tone. And the idea of these systems and frameworks is let people solve problems, not focusing on the detail and delivery and the manufacturing process. That's just boring. So if you can shift them to that problem solving space through these frameworks and systems, then wonderful. And I think that's where I see the sort of the discipline in the industry going as a whole.
And what were some of the enablers for that? Because I suppose you know, you came in and you sort of talked about how that was a slow, gradual process with a very small team, which in probably some ways benefited you.
Yes.
But you talked about sort of having to get buy-in at each stage in order for the organization to sort of really understand the value of what you were bringing. Do you think that that was the right or the only way it could have happened, or should there have been buy-in earlier to ramp that up? Like, I'm thinking about an organization's maybe on that journey now. Like, would you advise them to just go, look, this is just a slow, gradual process. It's going to take years to build these foundations and get this buy-in. Or is there something you would have done differently back at the beginning to, escalate that move, make that move quicker and get buy-in earlier? Because they got it eventually.
Yes, I think it's different in every organization. I'm going through that. In fact, I'm probably on my fourth version of that journey, especially where I am today. So I think it really depends on the environment you're in, the understanding and the buy-in to that, the state of that business at the time. So I think for where we were at Tide at that time, yes, it probably made sense because of the ultimately the people that were involved at a leadership level, my ability to either influence at that time and my confidence in it. I think when we've gone to other organizations like where we are today, we've got multiple brands, we've just been through a merger, we've literally had a whole new exec join. So there's just a whole load of change. But what we have done is set some of the core foundations for that. And now with the new stakeholders and senior leadership is bringing them on that journey. And I think that's a key bit. You have to bring people along on the journey. You can't just show them at the end. A design system will never be finished. But the way I describe it, it is the product that your design team own that builds other products. It is the Legos, the foundations. But I think you need to be able to show quick wins, and those need to be measurable wins back that show benefit to the team. Even at the moment, I'm having to highlight and illustrate value back to our design team. And that's important because we're geographically dispersed. We come from many different legacy backgrounds. Some understand it, some have to be bought into it because they're very focused on the manufacturing side, and that's part of their role. So it's not an issue, but there's lots of complexities to it. So I think we partnered earlier when we were with William Hill with the brand team to bring the brand team along, just to say, look, here's a platform. They were going to go on that journey anyway. Look, we've enabled you to do it quicker. At Tide, it was spotting the right opportunity with the desktop experience, which came through one of our designers and said, well, look, let's marry it up on this and use that as our sort of minimum viable approach to start to bring these layers of the brand. Of course, you then got different trajectories between bits of mobile, bits of desktop. But over time, it took about a year, we could then harmonize between the marketing and the social media. So I focused a lot on driving that personally myself and the couple of designers that we brought in to handle that. Then working with the agency on the broadcast work and then making sure that I suppose the typographic style or the approach represented how we were talking about the brand. That's really complicated where I am today because we've got 3 brands. We're in loads of different geographies. So at the moment, I'm very focused on product design and solving that problem, less so into working with my brand and marketing partners. But that will happen over time. But I think it's a case of not boiling the ocean. So to your question of how do people do it, I think you just need to understand your organization, the problems the business is trying to solve for their customers, and where if you're building a framework like this, how can you get value fast, and how can you illustrate the outcomes and value of that? I think that's the key bit, is about you're delivering value. It isn't a vanity project, and often these things can be seen as vanity projects if not correctly communicated.
Yeah, so it sounds like a lot of evaluation sort of needs to be done, and stages that you move through. And I guess the value is so intangible, it can be hard, I presume, to sort of demonstrate that both internally and externally. You know what I mean? To say this is the impact it's sort of having. But when you were brought in, I think when we last spoke, you sort of mentioned your chief product officer brought you in to transform the design function into a delivery powerhouse. So how's it going so far? You've touched upon a few bits, but generally, how do you feel like it's working?
Yeah, I think, well, yeah, so Juan Christian, so it was 4 CPOs ago, a lot of change over the last 18 months, 2 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I started with Juan's come in, ultimately changed the fortunes of it. I think I've spent the last decade of my career joining organizations where either design hasn't been given the opportunity, or it hasn't seized the opportunity, or the maturity of the organization's whole across product, engineering, design, marketing, brand just isn't where it should be. So I'm probably a sadist for joining multiple companies and brands to try and elevate it. But that's half the fun, isn't it? Because then you can create more value quicker because it's in such disarray. So one of the first things we did was to move away from being a fully contractor based operation. And this is prior to the merger with 888. So I think we were, I don't know, like 20 people, but half the team were contractors. Now, in my agency life, I was all over contracts. I thought it was a brilliant way to scale up and down with a core team as and where you needed specialists or generalists to do it. But I think when you're building the foundations of a product design team, in my experience, I think investing into the team and starting to build that culture as a core group makes sense because there's low maturity, and therefore there's probably low maturity around it in terms of product and your stakeholders potentially. Certainly in the environment I was working around, ways of working, collaboration. Design was very much seen as a delivery function with pockets of sort of innovation, but more focused on sort of delivery. I think the idea is ultimately that design can be well placed along with its partners. It's not the center, or it's equally balanced all these other disciplines, but to solve problems. And those problems can be internal, they can be business facing, they can be customer facing. The sweet spot is when you marry those together. But I think building the team together and starting with, I suppose, establishing the design practice and laying the foundations for a stable team, that's cool. So that's what I sort of focused on, and that was part of my sort of strategy that I sold in for when I joined. And then you can start to establish the design team and develop the skills. And that's what we've been doing in sort of year 2, more as we've merged together as a team. So because we're geographically dispersed, we've also merged. There were discrepancies in the standard and ability of, say, a common tool like Figma. So we created a bespoke Figma training call. Great guy called Erez in Tel Aviv came in, commissioned, and we listened to the team. Where were the gaps? Where was the knowledge? Then we looked at, well, what other things? Because also you're bringing people together from different geographies and cultures. So how do you rally people around a common thing? So IBM have an amazing thing called IBM Enterprise Design Thinking. It's free. It's a great course. There's like a 2-hour one. My 9-year-old's done that. Then there's a much bigger sort of 20-hour program. There's a third one where you can become a coach and mentor in design thinking. So I set the task to the team. And yes, it was about learning about design thinking, but I don't really care if it's design thinking. It's about learning to solve problems for the human that has the greatest need. But what it also did is it brought the team around a common thing that they were learning together, whether they loved it or hated it. For the most part, I think everyone quite enjoyed it. But now they've all done this Figma training together. They've all done design thinking training together. So that was sort of establishing a standard. So irrespective whether you're a junior, a mid, a senior, a leader like myself, there's now a common vernacular and a common approach to how we're doing things. Now, do we want to adopt design thinking? But I don't know if that needs to be a thing long term. I think it's much more about the frameworks to solving problems. And if you've got a better one, how might we, or lean, then absolutely use those. But I think then you can start to establish design as a sort of service, but layer across the business to a common standard. And we're kind of at that stage now, and then moving into sort of final stages of being much more of a strategic partner. So coming in early, understanding the commercial needs, and that's the journey we're on now. It's getting much better within 2 years of, well, what does the business care about? What do our customers care about? How can we then influence? And that's the big bit where I think a lot of leaders are having those conversations today around, well, how do you position design strategically? It's hard, but I think a lot of people just need to realize it is a business. We are there to make money or to solve problems, to help customers enable us. Otherwise, why are people coming to you in the first place?
Yeah, and I suppose with you guys, obviously, this, as you talked about the acquisition, with William Hill and sort of what you've inherited. So, given that you're trying to manage sort of 3 major global brands, and they're all probably at different stages of their journey, what are the challenges did that throw into the mix when that came on board? And do you take a similar approach to each brand, or is it completely unique? Or are you trying to sort of create some uniformity across that?
Yeah, so yeah, really good question. And it's hard. So I think the approach we did was, as ever, have a bit of a reorg. Everyone loves a reorg, but rather than sort of treat it at a brand layer, myself and my leadership team opted that we would then verticalize the team. So we have a sports team. So it's agnostic of brand. You focus on sports, or you focus on gaming, or you focus on another area like that. Safety, player safety, or core, which would be sort of accounts, registration, and payments. So therefore, we have designers who work within the sports vertical, but some are dedicated to the 888 brand, some are dedicated to, say, MRG, Mr. Green, and some to William Hill. Over time, as we can scale, I'd like it that you could therefore bring those designers to be agnostic of brands, but they are specialists, not only in design, but specialists within that area, say sports, because there are unique complexities to sports betting. And the same for gaming, and especially within poker, we have a couple of specialists who absolutely love it. That's where they've been operating for a number of years. But then equally, I can bring wider generalist designers into our other side of the business, the non-sports gaming retail, because most businesses have registration, they've got some sort of payments mechanics and so on, and player safety. Lots of brands these days have some sort of care requirement to their customers, especially for us within the gambling space. That's really critical to what we want to solve as designers, is to create an environment where people can come and use and play on our products, but do it within an environment that's safe for them. And it's same for us, because we have to work within quite a heavily regulated environment, much like banking and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's interesting how it's like you said, it's sports and there's nuances to each of those games, and obviously an understanding around the game itself, but maybe how people play it. I guess I'm just interested maybe on that sort of user experience side of things, how people are gaming these days. What are the demands being made of brands like yourselves, and that you're having to adapt to? Just don't know, just give us an insight into an
For
everyday
sure.
gamer and what that looks like.
The last time I was in IC was 10 years ago at Betfair, so I still think there's a lot that hasn't changed in a decade. And that industry and sector has always made a huge amount of money, whereas I've seen huge growth and drives in property tech, from my time at Zoopla, and then with financial institutions like Tide and so on. So I think that they're sort of somewhat catching up in areas, because they haven't had to challenge themselves in the same way as other sectors. And obviously we have things like the Gambling Commission's white paper that's come about, so that's changed some of the need and requirements. I think from what I recall a decade ago, we used to refer to some of these customers as whales. They were like big, heavy spenders. Some of that, a lot of that's changed because of regulation. So you've now got a greater volume of customers, but at a lower threshold to spend. And there are wagering requirements coming out now for, so I can't remember the exact age group, but I think it's under 21, maybe under 25. So £2 spins and things, which I think are a really sensible thing. Between what an industry thinks is an acceptable amount of spend, between what regular people might think is acceptable spend, there needs to be sort of alignment on that. In fact, there was a workshop this week where we were speaking to people who had problems in the past, and then I'm saying, well, what things could have been done to help mitigate those issues? And I think that's the place in our team to help understand then what are the safeguards we put in terms of play. Well, there's lots of people playing games, but it's always been a promiscuous environment for customers because there's so many bonus and options. So I mean, back in the day, people had maybe an average of like 5 accounts. I think that's sort of slimmed down a bit, but they're chasing bonuses and offers. And you get the occasional punter who wants to do, I don't know, the Oxford Cambridge boat race, or does the Grand National and things like that. So I think the behaviours are that people play. It is endemic within British culture. Just look at how many William Hills or Paddy Power are on the high street. It is part of who we are, and people absolutely love it. And our retail colleagues, when I go to our stores, are amazing. You've got people that have been there for like 15, 20, 30 years. There's a lot of, I think, any business, or certainly our design teams, can learn from that retail experience. It is hard to translate that into a digital property because you're not having that one-to-one interaction in the same way, but there's definitely a lot that those guys can teach us.
And like a new sports evolving, or is it, I don't know if you know that at all, but is it all still the traditional, the football, the horse racing? I don't know if there's any new things cropping up. Paddle these days, is it like, testing?
There's always options for new ways of betting. And I was speaking to, I can't remember their agency name, but a chap called Hem Patel used to have a agency called Signal Noise that the Economist Group bought back in the day. So really good guy. I was in fact just messaging him this morning. So they've been doing a lot of innovation work and looking at other ways of, I suppose, creating more markets. So I think he told me about a thing where they put a way to, maybe it's like a RFID chip or something within like a ball. So therefore you could get trajectory information, you could work pace, and you could get other data and statistics. So you look at American football, and it's kind of crazy they can't bet on it, but it's so much data. So and sports people love all of the data. If you look at like the Racing Post or going to a sports shop, the amount of information is just overwhelming. But classic one, I was speaking to my builder, we're doing a renovation, and he quite likes going the horses. He was like, yeah, it's not very good at maths. And it's like, literally, you're building my house and you're great at maths all out. And the things you can tell me about horse racing, because he found out I worked at William Hill, he's really good at it, but not in the sense that he associates. So how we can extrapolate that information, change it into different
Mm.
ways. My time at Betfair was founded on the exchange, so a gambler and the trader got together and they invented things like in-play betting that
Yeah.
changed the market forever. So what new things are evolved out of that? So I think there's opportunities for new sports to come in, certainly through the Olympics, which I don't think makes a huge amount of money for an operator like us. But I grew up skateboarding, so I got to bet on skateboarding, which was a thing that I actually knew something about years ago, because skateboarding was part of the Summer Olympics for the first time. So I think those are the things that will start to see different behaviours, but also, like we see with younger audiences, drinking less, more sports and activity. We've got to adapt and then understand what younger audiences want, and that comes through user research, talking to our audiences, but also making sure ultimately create a safe environment for them.
Yeah, it's an interesting point about data and just the data going into and the technology going into all sports these days, and therefore what you can track, what you can bet on, is changing. And like the in-play, and I guess that has massive impacts from a technology perspective, because more and more people are using the app in the middle of games or wanting to change things in the middle of games, and so it's all, I suppose, everything's very real time. It's bringing everything up into
Really so, and even with our gaming, say poker experience, we're doing more playful things. You can now throw little things at players, so you're bringing in little bits of gamification and play and just frivolous fun. But actually, that what seems frivolous is actually the engagement piece, and now it's quite widely adopted across a lot of the poker sort of landscape. So I think it's yet again just finding things that you see in other areas, from other brands. Then how can you either adapt it? So obviously the explosion of short form media content through I don't know, YouTube Shorts and so on. Well, how can you adapt that mechanic to find information or to explore content in different ways? When we're lucky, as well as being an operator, we are the owner of 2 gaming studios as well. So we're also a producer of a lot of content, which we then service to our brands, retail, but then to other brands as well. So it's quite interesting. We're also a broadcaster. So we have William Hill TV. So up in Leeds, got studios, presenters. So it's quite interesting. I think there's a massive opportunity to be able to join that stuff together in the future between our broadcast option and what you have in the app experience and so on, and make it in a way I suppose brands like Dazen have tried to allude to, but certainly what we see, the advent of the Apple and Netflix generation of producing content, but also being a platform supplier. I think there's definitely an opportunity there, but that stuff's expensive. It takes time. You've got to test it, and ultimately, as we're going through our sort of transition, the focus is on how do we maintain a stable commercial operation whilst meeting the needs of our customers.
Yeah, all makes sense. Yeah, it's exciting. It's interesting. I'm sure lots of other industries that probably could learn a lot from the gaming industry and what they're doing.
Huge. I mean, I was blown away when I joined Betfair 10 years ago. I was working at the BBC on iPlayer. Weirdly, a guy called Douglas Gambling phoned me up, so I thought it was a bit of a joke, but that actually was his real name. And then I joined, but when I turned up, there was a guy called Don Foch. So he'd been ex-lead at Apple for 15 years. He was key to the fruity coloured iMacs back in the day, the first gen that came out. And just the other folks that were there, like Julie's on this call and Tiberio, who I think is also on this call. It's like, wow, the standard's really high. Like, why are you all at a gambling company? And I think it was the complexity of the information. Some of them genuinely loved the sports we did, but the data and the challenge to solve. And having worked at many other sectors since, actually you're right, there's a huge amount that people can learn, because the fast turnover, sheer volume of information that you have to absorb, and we see that both on SaaS systems, consumer facing platforms. We're increasingly getting more used to a dashboard environment. I mean, just look at like Apple Health or Strava. The more and more you're seeing data and reporting in a way that we would have seen within the business world, within our consumer life.
And like the move towards direct consumer type brands, where you've always had that direct relationship with a customer, whether it's in your app or in a retailer. A lot of brands are finding that for the first time in retail, for example, and used to go into sort of marketplaces or other retailers. Now it's like they've got to have that direct relationship. So how do they maintain that loyalty and engagement? That's something you guys have always wrestled with, for decades. So yeah, interesting. But so you've talked about the retail expertise as well, and how strong that offering was, because I think in the digital era, and I'm sure it's easy to forget how many retail outlets you probably have. I mean, I don't know, across William Hill and
I can't remember that figure, but I think we've got the second biggest, because one of our competitors merged. They brought a couple of their brands together. So
yeah.
I think we're certainly top, certainly in top three, not top two. I would hazard a guess we've probably got like 1,200 stores around the country. So I mean,
Yeah.
certainly in every high street in every town, there's certainly is a William Hill, and then obviously you can expand that footprint into Europe, I would hope, in the future.
Yeah. And so, like, from that perspective, obviously, with the tradition of the business being built before apps as a retailer, on a high street and physical location, how have you managed to integrate the brand um, into both product and sort of digital experience? And has there been, you talked about lots of change at the top, and just culturally, I'm interested in sort of how the business has transitioned and how that sort of flow of design has worked across both physical and digital.
Yeah, so we obviously have our retail estate partners, but then we'll look after the planning up in Leeds. Can't forget the other location. We have two shops of the future, so they're pretty whizzy locations, trialing a lot of new tech for equally as much as for customer, but also the internal teams. So the internal teams will have like an iPad, but the relationship with the staff and the actual customers is really tight. So they know everyone by name. They know, the Brians, the Haleys who are coming in. So, if they can spot behaviors, and there are environments created, this weird little booth I'm in today where people can sit down, you can have a conversation about, whether just life in general, because they become, much like the pub. It's just like you get to know people at such a personal level, and if someone's doing something different or a bit more quiet and things. So it's almost that level of duty of care. I'm just so impressed with our retail customers, that they generally care about the customers because they know them like an extended family. So I think that's really hard to understand and translate into a digital experience. But that's where I suppose the player safety controls, which are more, I think in the past, have been orientated around a customer being proactive. I think as we start to use AI and other systems, then there can be a more generative approach to looking at behavior and then suggesting things to help curb things if we see a negative approach. In terms of how does design or digital translate into a retail environment, we have these things called yes, I'm trying to think what's that. They're basically betting terminals. I know SSBT is a sort of internal term. So that is the app experience wider, and we have our own proprietary platform, and then a lot of it is trying to bring that into that environment. But of course, you're looking at a terminal, so we design our own boxes as well. That's not a part my team is directly involved with. I have had a few meetings and conversations, but because you've got physical interior designers creating that, and that's way more suited. But what is the environment we need to create in terms of the scale of an icon and the depth? And this is something I looked at when I was at the BBC, and looking at sort of lean back experience when you're looking at TV, and then how you interact, and then sort of ergonomics of the experience as a whole. So I think that has been really interesting from the retail team. And Ola, one of our designers, had highlighted some bits around, well, this just doesn't work. It works on digital in a traditional interface on a phone or maybe a laptop, but actually when you're interfacing with the terminals, that didn't work. So I think it's them going into the stores and really seeing how human beings interfacing with a terminal is where we start to bridge the divide. But a lot of it is therefore supported by our retail colleagues and that tight-knit relationship. I remember a long time ago, like maybe 20 years ago in my career when I was a younger designer, working with some Bond Street brands, and it was really early days of digital. And it's like, well, how do you bring that Bond Street experience? And I'm sure we've all been to Bond Street or similar sort of high-end stores, and maybe there's an apprehension depending on who you are going in, and then how you're treated, and do I feel like I should be in this Cartier or whatever shop? And how do you bring that across? Because you don't want that. That's a weird thing that you don't want to translate. But how do you bring that sort of high-end experience? Equally with a family brand, how do you think that playfulness, that entry, that thing? So on our stores, we have big screens on the exterior. There's been a lot of work over the last couple of years to then link that, so we can do different promotions at different times of the day, at the weekend. So for the estate as a whole is much more digitized, and therefore I think got a presence on the high street. That's massive. That's our private space that we can communicate things on. So I think that's where there's a lot of things that then bridge sort of the world of digital back into the retail space. And I try to get to our retail shops probably at least, I don't know, every sort of 4 to 6 weeks. Even if it's just my local one, to pop in, place a bet, just have a look. And I'm not a particularly massive gambler.
Do they know you in there? Do they know your name?
They're getting to know me a bit more.
Okay.
I've got like 3 or 4 stores near to me, so it's in sort of Kingston, Surbiton, and Tolworth. So I sort of pop, because they're all different sizes. The one in Kingston is quite large. There's a beautiful one near in Mayfair near our head office, and that's amazing. That's a really stunning building and nice place to go. But I think you've got to go to see what it's like in all the places. But what I say is common across the retail estate is the quality of the retail team and their care for their customers, but also just like there's consistent customers coming into it. And I think that sort of days of old, as a place with old blokes smoking a fag and sitting there, those places have really changed, and they're deliberately trying to make them move into, I suppose, the modern world that we live into. People go into prets and coffee shops, environments. I believe even back in the day, there was a store and they were trialing making hot dogs. Not sure how long that lasts, but But also, I think there's a large number, maybe like 100 plus of our stores, which are right next to football stadiums or in stadiums, horse racing environments. So there's loads of great ideas. And you get obviously really big communities. So there's one near the Arsenal. So obviously a lot of the Arsenal fans will go into that. So yet again, you bring that camaraderie. So what could you do around that? There's a huge opportunity for just simply many digital brands not having retail footprint can't take advantage of. You must remember the day of like beacons being a thing, and you're going to be able to go into a shop and a beacon's going to recognize you. Where did that go? Literally haven't seen that anywhere.
Yeah. I haven't heard that phrase for a long time,
And
actually.
that was a cool thing. I love the
Well,
idea.
like QR codes came back over COVID, which was like a unexpected sort of
Yeah,
revival.
I would quite like a QR code. That's short.
Everyone does. So yeah, no, that's interesting. But yeah, I guess people would want maybe different things from the physical and the digital experience as well,
Yes.
because like I guess when you walk into a store, you're there, it's you. Everyone can see your face, and you're willing to be spoken to and open to that. When you're on an app, you maybe don't want someone asking how you are or how things are going, or you don't want that, someone intruding into your private space because you're at home and you don't want to be seen. So
You're completely right. I mean, I remember we
different environments.
looked at years ago. I can't remember where it was, but the socialization of these sorts of things. But it was exactly as you just described there. There are environments where people want to be social, and people where it's also a lot of it is me time. And I remember that from a load of longitudinal diary studies that we did at Betfair a decade ago, and speaking to customers and spending 2 or 3 hours with them, and I'm saying, well, why did you do it? What sort of times did you do it? What were the feelings? And looking at the diary studies they'd recorded over a month and when they were playing, a lot of it was just it's escapism, because either the type of lifestyles that they lead or they just wanted that me time, which is totally understandable.
Yeah. So talk to me about some of the leadership changes. I mean, you mentioned there's been a couple of different, CPOs and different people at the top. Obviously, don't need to name names or go into any specifics, but like in terms of just from a cultural, there's a lot of transformation you're having to juggle, mergers and acquisitions, multiple brands, new leadership coming in. How does that sort of impact what you're trying to do, and how do you sort of take that on board, embrace that, and get people on the journey as you sort of talked about last time?
Well, I'll talk about it broadly because I've worked for a number of organizations. I've been part of organizations. When I was at Red Ventures, along with Silver Lake, we acquired ZPG. So we acquired Zoopla, Uswitch, and Money.co.uk. So I think for any of those sort of transitions, it's really hard on the people. Inevitably, especially if you're coming for a venture fund, it's about the financials, and largely that is an important part of it. So you don't make the financials, then your business isn't sustainable. So ultimately, that can result in cutting of people or being more lean in different ways. So I think all of those things have an impact. The thing I've always tried to focus on is, well, I certainly have authority and the somewhat level of autonomy on the teams that I look after within product design. So therefore, it's about investing into the people heavily. So we touched on earlier about what things around growth, and I think giving designers the opportunity to not only do the great work that they want to, but grow and develop their soft and behavioral skills is really important. So we spent a lot of time. I've done a lot of talks and sessions, not only to designers, but around the organization about storytelling, and then offer those things or bringing in guest speakers. Just do the things that almost it's a distraction from the reality. For this businesses are in a bit of turmoil at some state, and you've got to align. But ultimately, most of those companies have got better as a result of it. Not always. And I think the journey that we've gone through where I am today, it's been tricky because there's lots of change. I mean, wholesale change in leadership, and we're a public listed company, so there's lots of information about it. But I think with the leadership we have now, there is stability, there is a plan, there is a strategy. It is working at a pace that I haven't experienced in organizations in a long time. And that's really welcome. And I think it's also making hard decisions, being honest and forthright in sort of, company town halls. We're making this, we know it's hard, but this is what we're doing. We're giving everyone the transparency that's there where where you can give transparency. And yet again, I'll be very clear to the team around who we are and what we are. And some years you can give rewards, some years you can't. But I'd like to remind the team that we all do have a job. We're working as designers. If you have challenges or you want to know more about something, we'll simply come and ask. I think it's as simple as that. As long as you can work in an environment where you feel that you can come and ask any of the leadership, well, why are we doing this? And I think that's the bit that our new leadership have very much embraced. So we have a Slido, but we moved away from being anonymous to people, put your name down, because there's a respect that comes with that. I think sometimes anonymity, people can get a bit childish in their behaviors and the way that they ask things. So, let's have a respect for everybody, but also ask difficult questions. Those are embraced in our organization. And I think that is a strength and shows a layer of our culture. Culture is, I had an old CEO say you couldn't microwave a culture, which always made me think of a scientific little petri dish and killing it off. But I think what he meant by that is you can't create overnight. Isn't something blossoms. It's the behaviors. It's how you treat each other. It's how you support one another. It's the Slack messages. It's remembering that people are in different time zones. All of those bits build your culture, and the things that you tolerate, that's the worst of your culture. So if you can build the things, or at least be the change you want to be, which sounds a bit cliche, but I think that's what's helped me get to where I am in my career. Mostly be nice to people, help people, always be available to listen. I didn't know you for a month ago, and here's a podcast, because it's like we can get to talk about these things and share. And some of the people on this call have helped me on that journey to be a better personal designer. But it hasn't all been rosy. Certainly with my time at Zoopla, I think I got chewed up and spat out as a design leader. That was an interesting challenge, because the way that the business was structured and the way that things were positioned. But you carry on. We all have our good days and bad days because we're just human.
Yeah. No, it sounds great, and it sounds like a lot of investment goes into training and some of the different tools and systems you use there. Are there any sort of like little things that you've implemented you can think of across the team, ideas that have just quite easy to do that you've seen really successful in bringing people together?
I think so. Like inviting guests in, guest speakers. So I'm lucky to have worked in this industry for 25 years and know some really interesting folks. So bring those guys in. There is a handful of guys and girls for whichever organisation I join. I'll bring them in at some point, because they've got fantastic stories to tell about the type of work they're doing, or the culture, or the environment, the agencies, or the businesses. It's having your monthly town hall with your team, and using, I don't know, we have a thing called Peakon, so it's like a listening, not, that sounds really like KGB, but it's so people can feed in, they can answer surveys, and then you get a sort of pulse of the team or the business. So therefore responding to that stuff quickly. So literally I have a SLA to myself, but if someone posts the things on Peakon, I will answer that back within usually the day. And if I don't know it, I'll come back to it. And if my door is always open. So I think my role is to create the environment for designers to thrive. I'm not necessarily involved in the day-to-day minutiae of design. My role is to create that culture and that environment. And I think it's the training, the helping people, it's extending it beyond. So I'm not just focused on design and being sort of one-trick pony, but it's about problem solving at scale. And those are pieces I'm working on at the moment. I think the more senior you become, then it's looking outside of in your domain. How do you then focus in the organization as a whole? So how do we bring problem solving to legal teams? I've helped them about storytelling, or there was a data security team. They wanted to know how do you get other people to care about data security when it's not the most exciting thing. So we ran some storytelling workshops and actually found bits that other teams could understand, and therefore there was a greater ability for them to have a relationship and to be able to get people to care about data security. So I think those are the bits to dive into an organization. Don't just be the person for the role you were hired to do. Seek the opportunities. And I think if you do those things, then you see the opportunity for growth. And therefore, I think by proxy, that's where you can extend the ability for design rather than it just being as a surface or a delivery.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And what you talk about sort of, that I'm sure that harnesses like innovation within the company, and
I hope so. That's
storytelling helps people relate to what it is you're trying to achieve, right? And takes them on that journey.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's literally the thing I'm focusing a lot on this year. And then off the back of that, you can bring other teams together. So a large issue, and the one I highlighted a decade at Betfair, where all these different teams and disciplines didn't talk to each other. Well, if you can get this sort of harmony and people to care about the common thing, and obviously that has to come from an executive strategy, but you can start to harmonize. That's where I do start to spend time with my partners in the broadcast team or to brand or to marketing, because there will be a day and some point where we get to work on a thing and we can really look at it holistically. And it's like, right, that works. And then hopefully over time we'll build the trust. But with, you know, that's got to be, you kind of got to find the sun, the moon, the stars to align. That doesn't always happen. You know, sometimes you get two of those things to align and you can get so far. You know, if you can get that holy trinity together, then magic can happen.
Yeah. So talk to what's the sort of makeup of your design team or teams, and do you ever look for sort of specialists? Do you work with any agencies or third-party providers in sort of specialist areas because that's the right thing to do, or it's quicker, faster, cheaper, whatever? Like, how does that look from sort of in-house team to outsource?
So at my time at Tide, yes, we worked with a specialist little boutique agency called Sidekick, one from Rupert in Barcelona. So they helped with our traditional advertising. So they would come up with narrative, which was sort of overarching narrative for a campaign, which we could then work on TV, then translate into press, and then across the arc of social. I think the thing that I brought into that relationship was thinking, well, a lot of places would just do the TV, but the reality is you're producing really high premium content. So really, how far can we take it? So we moved into lots of behind the scenes content, but it's used for social, taking the imagery and the right sort of portrait. So for TV is obviously landscape, but how can you then use it within the app experience? If you start the Tide app today, you see some of our members, our customers, and it's their pictures at the front. So it immediately starts to feel more human. But yeah, so for that sort of relationship, it made sense to partner with a smaller agency. For specialists, then in the team I have today, we have Jonathan, who's a motion designer, a couple of UX writers. So I think those are sort of disciplines. But yeah, for the most part, we sort of generalists. I think as a designer, I've worked across many different sectors. I'm a designer. I'm there to solve problems. I don't have to be this notion of you need to have worked in this sector or you couldn't do that. It just, I find it kind of maddening. You know, I could go and join a health tech tomorrow. It'd still be the same designer. You'd have to learn and get up to speed, but generally that's half the gig. And I think that's the thing that agencies do very well, which is if you're working as a UX or a product solving agency, then you have to understand that customer need quickly. But it's really hard because a business will always understand itself better than bringing an agency partner. So I think where and how you bring in agencies is difficult depending on the maturity of where you are as a business. And certainly at Tide, we tried to partner with an agency, but because of the makeup of some of the stakeholders and how we were operating at the time, it made it very difficult to access the data. And that's half the trouble is, well, how do you get that real information that you need to make the right decisions? I don't think I've worked in any company ever where it was all sort of here's perfectly, here's every journey, we've got the analytics, here's the data points. It just doesn't happen because just different fiefdoms or cultures, or it simply doesn't exist. So I think it's how do you work with parties? I think yet again, it's like the question at the beginning of this. It really depends on the environment, the culture, who you are as an individual to make that happen. And sometimes you just can't, and that's fine. It's just difficult, and it's not the right time. And then you focus on something else that you can do. I think otherwise you just go mad trying to focus on some of these bits. That might sound defeatist, but no, I think it's just pragmatic and realistic.
Yeah, well, it's a complex organization, and as I said, you've got regular. I can't say the word.
Regular.
Regulatory. If you could get the right way around, regulatory changes, and that's hard for anyone to come on board and help you with, right, from a third party perspective.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, I mean, because there were just so many different lenses to look at this, from a commercial point of view, from a legal point of view, a customer safety point of view. And there are things that will come in that you've got to do that, but that's going to impact the commercials. So how do you balance those things? Because we are a commercial business, not a charity. But yes, you have a duty of care. And certainly financial institutions. I mean, well, it's always funny when I go to like events, and then of course you've got people from different sectors, and then it's like, William from gambling. It's like, gambling, but it's like, well, I remind you, financial institution people and the people that work in the oil sector, one, the British public did not have to bail your industry out, and look at you, all fossil fuel mining companies. So it's kind of like you can have your view, but gambling is fun, but only if the duty of care is given, because all sectors are doing some level of harm. I was reading a thing this morning from the founder of All Saints, the fashion brand, about some of the brands out of Asia, Temu and things, and the sheer volume of waste. I think Apple on the stats I read earlier, Apple on a good day ships about 1 ton of stuff around the world. This company is shipping 5 tons a day. So you think of all the traffic, the pollution that comes out of that, and clearly those are things we have to resolve for now. And lots of companies have their ESG policies and things, but I think it's down to individuals or leaders and managers to see what we can do as a business to make the teams happier, better. How do we then contribute back to society as a whole? And there's so much opportunity to get, I think, youth involved in different sectors. I've gone to quite a few secondary school sessions that talk about design or what it can be, because they just don't know about these things. But I mean, who grows up and wants to be a, I don't know, digital producer or wants to be a project manager and things? But actually, lots of people end up doing this stuff, but they simply don't know they exist. So I think there's so much opportunity at the moment to be able to give back, and it's a big discussion I'm having a lot through forums that I join or conversations I'm having. So I encourage anyone in this call for, if they know a way of giving back to younger audiences or letting somebody know that this sort of job exists and these environments, then go and do it, because those kids really need to know about it because they want to know about it.
Yeah, but it's really interesting just seeing it in a different perspective, because obviously it does get a bad rep, but like you said, there's a without a physical product, there's a massive reduction in carbon footprint just in that alone, that you're not having to ship things all the time. And yes, like in the industry, it's got its issues, but I suppose it's about leaning in and solving those and being a part of that conversation.
Exactly. My job is not to sell gambling. My job is, if you wish to do it, to create the best experience. And that's exactly the same with like alcohol or food or everything. People aren't shoving it down your throat. It's your choice to consume that. And if you are going to consume the experiences we create, then we'll create the best ones that we can within a safe framework for customers and make it enjoyable, because ultimately it's playful. It should be fun. Go bowling, go to the cinema. These things are there to provide entertainment. Nothing less than, go to a restaurant and you have a crappy meal. That's just sad and disappointing. Or go and watch a film for 20 quid and it's rubbish. It's just like these things often happen. So how do you elevate the sort of standards? I started my career in catering, waiter, chef, washer up, KP, washer upper. And I think there's a huge amount. You can look at the restaurant trade and any sort of digital experience, front of house, what is the thing, the service quality, how do you resolve any issues for customer? If you can really do all those things tight, you'll have a good business, irrespective of the sector.
Yeah, no, it's brilliant. Well, thanks for that, Will. I mean, if anyone's got any other questions now, please feel free to drop them in the chat or turn your camera off and you're free to chat to us. But I think, from me, I think you've covered all my questions. I thought that was really, really insightful. And gave me a whole learning around design and insight into the gaming industry that I didn't have before. So no, I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, no worries. Well, thank you for having me. Definitely good to sit and chat on a Wednesday afternoon about all things design and certainly sports, and encourage anyone to, just go and Google design systems, go and learn about these things. There's lots of interesting content around how that can help. And I think it doesn't have to be about design. It's like design thinking. I think it gets bad rep because everyone thinks it's about design. It's about problem solving, and design systems or these frameworks are there as enablers. So if your brand or marketing or any organization and you have sort of common elements that maybe other teams can use, then there's probably a framework or a repository system that can help people pull it together. And it's amazing how fast you can then move teams into a greater collaboration space away from necessarily day-to-day mundane manufacturing space. I mean, that for me is a much more interesting thing to help designers or anyone marketing products teams evolve forward.
Yeah, there's a couple of resources you mentioned today, like the IBM thing, and just little tools and things you've used and talked about. I'll grab those off you, Will, if you don't mind. Sort of,
yeah, absolutely.
I can share them with anyone listening, because
IBM Enterprise Design Thinking. It's all free, amazing resource. As I said, I've had my whole team do it. It's been part of like an objective for each quarter. I can see 2 design leaders on this call writing that down right now, Jane and Julie. And then, it's just like, it's amazing how much stuff is out there. There's some other ones I'll find. Some clever person a few years ago literally pulled and collated all of the resources for any part of the design sphere learning and put it into a compendium online, and then it links out to all of this stuff. There's another brand called InVision not the best tool in the world, but it was some excellent resources. I did go to it the other day, and I think they might have pulled it down for a while. But if it comes back, then like here's a guide to agile, here's a guide to design leadership, here's a guide to working with products and tech. So just go out and find it. It's all free on YouTube, of course. I see Chandeep's got a question.
Yeah, Chandeep, do you want to jump in?
Sure. Yeah. Great insights. I spent a lot of time looking at the more technical side of design systems. One of the things that you might not know is InVision is sunsetting at the end of the year. So I think they sold the product to someone, but I think Figma's probably eaten their market. But in terms of that translation of all of your design system work and thinking, when that's moving across the entire end-to-end system, like the handoff aspects towards the tech side, which is I think what InVision did quite well for a while, and I guess Figma is replacing. Do you see any particular challenges there, or what are your secrets to making that process work really smoothly?
So I think the challenges are getting buy-in, so you can have the relationship and the access to the developer resource, people, to actually bring your design element into a codified piece of interaction. I think the second one is then maintaining and building out a team that can then support that. Certainly where we are at the moment in the organisation I'm in today, we're focusing very much on the design part of that, as we then, I suppose, build the narrative and bring our partners at CTO level along, so if you can free up that capacity. When we did that work at Tide, we were fortunate that we found a body of work that we could plug into, and then over time they could see the value and drive it together. But I think as with anything, it's about the communication. So it's have your COE, your Centre of Excellence, or whatever you want to call it, bringing those different parties together. And then you can work as a collaborative team, and then you can form a strategy as a group between design, engineering, marketing, product, whoever the stakeholders need to be. But you can't do it in isolation. I think that's half the danger, is doing these things in isolation just simply won't work. You have to bring your partners in. And the power of the design system is, as you're expressing here, is when it comes together in live code. And therefore platforms like GitHub and so on, or we're using Figma along with Zero Height as our repo for accessing all of our content. But ultimately, I need the engineering teams to tell me how they wish to sort of collaborate, and then we'll pull those things together. But yeah, I don't, the notion of sort of throwing it over the wall just seems odd to me. I think you have to do this stuff in partnership. But that's the power bit, isn't it, really? Getting the buying, building those relationships.
Brilliant, thanks.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Well, I think that's all we've got time for. But yeah, again, thank you, Will, for sharing all your insights. And yeah, we'll put the recording up on the BD Matters website and on YouTube in the next couple of days.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. I really enjoyed it. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in.